Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Nick's final concession comes not with a roar, but with a fractured breath that slightly escapes his lips as the life drains from him, turning what should have been another heated Newman family battle into the most ruinous moment Victor Newman will ever face, because this isn't just a dying man speaking, this is a son crumping a verity so disastrous it rewrites the heritage of an conglomerate erected on power, control, and ruthless survival. Nick lies there, crippled, broken, his palpitation weakening with every alternate, while Victor hauls over him, demanding answers, demanding obedience indeed now, barking orders at croakers who are too late and security who can't undo what's formerly happed, but Nick's eyes lock onto his father's with a calm that Victor has no way seen ahead, a calm born not of peace, but of futurity. In a coarse tale meant only for Victor, Nick begins his concession, and the words cut deeper than any pellet or blade ever could. He tells Victor that everything he fought to cover, every deal, every treason, every adversary crushed under Newman Enterprises' heel, has been poisoned at the source by a secret Victor no way saw coming, one Nick has carried alone, rotting inside him, because exposing it sooner would have destroyed too numerous lives, including his own. Victor scoffs at first, dismissing it as the distraction of a dying man, but Nick's coming words indurate him solid. Nick reveals that Victor's topmost palm, the moment he believes defined him as untouchable, was erected on a taradiddle Nick helped bury times ago to save the family, to save the Newman name, to save Victor himself. Nick confesses that the fall of Victor's most dangerous adversary, the reproach that cemented Victor's reign and cancelled his rival ever, wasn't won through strength or brilliance, but through a crime so insupportable that if the verity ever shells, Victor won't just lose his conglomerate, he'll lose his children, his heritage, and his place in history. Nick admits he falsified substantiation, manipulated substantiations, and paid off the one person who could have cleared Victor fully, all under the belief that guarding his father justified any sin. Victor's face rains bouts of color as the consummation hits. The man he believed he defeated fairly was actually offered on the balcony of the Newman myth, and Nick was the cutthroat. Nick's voice trembles as he admits that the guilt no way left him, that every time Victor sermonized about honor and family, it felt like a cutter ringing deeper in his casket. Victor tries to intrude, to deny it, to command Nick to stop talking, but Nick presses on, fueled by the urgency of death. He reveals that the substantiation he buried still exists, hidden where Victor would no way supposed to look, shielded by someone Victor formerly trusted implicitly, someone who'll now be forced to choose between fidelity and verity. Nick's final concession doesn't stop there. He delivers the cruelest blow last, telling Victor that the person who paid the loftiest price for their taradiddle was innocent, and that their family has been living in quiet ruin ever ago, ignorant that the Newmans stole their justice. Gashes band down Victor's face as the weight of it crushes him, because this isn't just a reproach, it's a moral obliteration. Nick's breathing grows shallow as he tells his father that this secret will come out, not because Nick wants vengeance, but because the verity always demands its due, and when it does, Victor will eventually face consequences he can't buy, hang, or blackjack down. Nick grips Victor's hand with surprising strength for one final moment and whispers that everything Victor erected was defended by Nick's silence, and now that silence is gone. As Nick exhales his final breath, Victor collapses to his knees, no longer the Goliath of Genoa City but a broken father gaping at the body of the son who offered his soul for him. The room feels lower, suffocating, as Victor realizes Nick has left behind a ticking time lemon that will explode long after his death, ripping through Newman Enterprises, tearing piecemeal what remains of the Newman family, and exposing Victor not as an idol who conquered all, but as a man whose conglomerate was erected on stolen verity and buried lives. In the fate, whispers spread through Genoa City as subtle cracks appear, a document still resurfacing, an old substantiation suddenly willing to talk, and supporter distancing themselves from Victor, and with every earthquake, Victor hears Nick's final words echoing in his mind. The downfall is no longer academic, it's ineluctable. Victor may survive suits, apprehensions, and public demotion, but the topmost discipline is formally sealed. He must live knowing that the son he loved, the son who challenged him, the son who tried to be better than him, failed, carrying the weight of Victor's sins so heavy that it eventually crushed him. There's no coming back from this, no redemption vow important enough to abolish the image of Nick's final, ruinous concession, because Victor Newman didn't just lose a son that day, he lost the vision that he was ever insurmountable, and the verity Nick unleashed will ensure Genoa City no way lets him forget it. In the days that follow Nick's death, Genoa City doesn't mourn, still it trembles, because grief mixed with unanswered questions has a way of turning into dubitation, and dubitation is the one adversary Victor Newman has no way been suitable to fully control. The sanctioned story is woeful but simple. A idol falls, a son dies too soon, a family shattered by fate. But beneath the face, commodity sharp is spreading, an apprehension that indeed Victor's ironclad character cannot silence, because those who were closest to Nick begin to smell that his final moments carried further than pain, they carried intent. Sharon renewals their last discussion over and over, visited by the way Nick looked at her, as if he were saying farewell to further than just his life, as if he were handing off a burden he could no longer carry alone. Victoria notices the way Victor refuses to meet her eyes whenever Nick's name is spoken, how his wrathfulness flares too presto, too violently, as though rage is the only thing keeping commodity far darker from breaking through. Adam, ever the stranger, feels it most acutely. He recognizes guilt when he sees it, and Victor's guilt is screaming indeed when his mouth stays shut. At the burial, Victor stands rigid as mourners line up, offering condolences that sound concave indeed to their own cognizance, and when the minister speaks of heritage, Victor flinches, because that word has come a curse. Nick's pall lowers into the ground, and with it goes the last hedge between Victor and the verity he now knows will destroy him. What Victor cannot escape is the certainty that Nick didn't brood his concession into the void, he rumored it knowing the verity would outlast him. And Victor is right to be hysterical, because the dominoes have formally begun to fall. A sealed envelope shells in the possession of someone Victor formerly considered untouchable, someone who owes Nick a debt deeper than fidelity, a silent guardian of the verity, now forced by Nick's death to decide whether guarding Victor is worth continuing a taradiddle that has formerly claimed one life. Meanwhile, an old case train long believed to be lost reappears in a fine library, flagged by a clerk who doesn't understand why it was altered, only that the differences point straight to Newman influence. Each discovery is small on its own, but together they form a pattern, and patterns are how conglomerates fall. Victor attempts to go on the descent, summoning attorneys, investigators, and spin croakers. Barking orders late into the night, but for the first time, his confidence rings false indeed to himself. Nick's words echo relentlessly. You can't buy this down. The most ruinous part isn't the trouble of exposure, it's the consummation that Nick loved him enough to damn himself, and that love has now come Victor's discipline. As rumors spread, cracks appear within the family. Victoria demands answers, her fidelity strained by the knowledge that Nick failed carrying commodity he couldn't partake with her. Adam, seeing blood in the water, begins asking the questions Victor fears most, not out of revenge, but out of a crooked need for honesty that has always defined their relationship. Sharon finds herself drawn into the storm when a foreigner approaches her, claiming Nick trusted her further than anyone, and left behind instructions meant only for her if commodity happened to him. The communication is vague but nipping, intimating at a verity buried so deep it could take the Newmans down with it. Victor tries to intermediate, to intimidate, to manipulate, but his usual tactics boomerang, because grief has stripped down the fear people formerly felt around him. Genoa City senses weakness, and weakness invites attack. Old adversaries resurface, inspired by whispers that Victor's history is eventually catching up to him. Indeed, abettors begin to part themselves, unintentional to be contributory damage when the verity explodes. What haunts Victor most is the way Nick's absence feels louder than his presence ever was. Every room carries echoes of his voice, every decision reminds Victor that Nick was frequently the heart he ignored. Now that heart has come a specter, following Victor through the halls of his own home, reminding him that the conglomerate he erected demanded a immolation, and Nick paid it willingly. The night Victor eventually breaks is quiet, alone in his study, gaping at a snap of Nick as a child, smiling with a trust that feels unsupportable now. Victor whispers justifications into the darkness, knowing they're useless, knowing remission is end commodity Nick left him. The secret Nick unleashed doesn't explode all at formerly, it seeps, poisoning everything it touches, until the Newman name itself becomes synonymous with corruption and treason. Suits impend, examinations renew, and the press begins circling like predators, seeing the blood in the air. Victor fights with everything he has left, but the Verity moves else than his adversaries ever did. It doesn't sweat him. As Genoa City edges near to the disclosure Nick set in stir, one thing becomes sorrowfully clear: Nick's final concession wasn't an act of vengeance, nor was it a plea for redemption. It was a reckoning, a calculated release of a Verity too heavy for one man to carry, and now that burden belongs to Victor alone. When the fallout eventually comes, when the substantiation is revealed, when the innocent are vindicated, when the Newman conglomerate stands exposed, Victor will still be standing, but he'll be standing in remains, forced to live with the knowledge that his son's last act was to ensure the Verity could no longer be buried. In the end, Nick did what Victor no way could. He chose Verity over power, indeed if it meant dying for it, and that choice will echo through Genoa City long after the dust settles, leaving Victor Newman to face the one adversary he cannot master, the heritage his own son assured would eventually come due. As the weeks stretch into months, the foreshocks of Nick's final concession evolve from whispers into seismic tremblors that reshape Genoa City's power structure, because secrets, formerly loosened by death, have a way of demanding daylight, and the Verity Nick unleashed refuses to stay buried. The disquisition that Victor formerly believed he could still suffocate begins to take on a life of its own when a determined quarter attorney reopens the cold case tied to Victor's long-ago palm, citing irregularities that can no longer be explained down as pastoral crimes or coexistence. Processes follow, also grounds, and for the first time in decades Victor Newman isn't decreeing the narrative, he's replying to it. Each process feels like another echo of Nick's voice, another memorial that his son orchestrated this reckoning with nipping perfection. Victoria struggles to attune the father she doted with the man now exposed by layers of dishonesty, her grief hardening into a resoluteness that frightens Victor more than any adversary ever has. She begins to dig, not out of malignancy, but out of a hopeless need to understand why Nick carried this burden alone, and with every document she uncovers, the picture becomes clearer and further horrifying. Adam, seeing an occasion and a reckoning intertwined, plays both sides with surgical perfection, offering Victor strategic advice while still feeding information to those circling the Newman conglomerate, driven by the belief that Verity, no matter how unattractive, is the only currency that matters presently. Sharon becomes the emotional center of the storm when Nick's final contingency plan is revealed: a recorded communication, not a concession for the world, but a chart, outlining where the buried substantiation can be set up and how it connects to the innocent family destroyed by the Newman's lie. She agonizes over whether to release it, torn between recognizing Nick's integrity and guarding the children who still bear the Newman name, but Nick's words hang her, that silence is conspiracy, and love doesn't excuse injustice. As the net tightens, Victor's abettors fracture, board members abdicate, and Newman Enterprises stock begins a freefall that no quantum of bravado can stop. The press devours every development, framing Victor not as the fabulous Goliath of assiduity but as a relic of unbounded power eventually facing consequences, and with each caption Victor feels the weight of Nick's immolation crushing down harder. The most ruinous blow comes when the family, wronged by Victor's once crime way into the light, armed with substantiation and a resoluteness forged by times of quiet suffering, their pain transubstantiating from citation to focal point in a case that threatens to review justice in Genoa City. Victor attempts one last scheme, offering agreements, issuing veiled pitfalls, indeed meaning fleeing the country, but every option collapses under the consummation that this battle cannot be won, it can only be endured. When the Verity eventually breaks in full, unveiled through court evidence and irrefragable evidence, the courtroom is silent, not with shock, but with recognition, as if Genoa City inclusively understands that this moment has been ineluctable for times. Victor listens as Nick's part in the cover-up is revealed, each word a cutter, because while the world condemns Victor, it mourns Nick, painting him as both a abettor and fatality, a man who trespassed to cover his father and failed to correct it. The verdict is nippy and merciless: legal consequences for Victor, fiscal ruin for his conglomerate, and an endless stain on the Newman heritage that no reason can abolish. In the fate, Victor retreats into insulation, stripped of power, wealth lowered, influence shattered, forced to defy a silence far louder than any courtroom gavel, the absence of Nick's voice, the absence of the son who formerly stood between him and his worst instincts. Genoa City moves on, reshaped by the fallout, alliances reforming, new leaders rising from the ashes of the old order, but Victor remains firm in the moment. Nick rumored the verity, replaying it endlessly, understanding too late that his conglomerate was no way truly his topmost achievement, his children were, and he lost one by demanding too important fidelity and immolation too little verity. In the end, Nick's final concession becomes further than a reproach, it becomes a legend, a exemplary tale rumored whenever power grows unbounded, a memorial that indeed the potent numbers can be undone by the love of a son stalwart enough to choose verity over survival. Victor Newman lives on, but not as a king, as a man visited by the heritage his own child assured would eventually be honest, a heritage erected not on domination, but on the ruinous cost of buried sins brought screaming into the light. As the pressure mounts, Genoa City shifts into a state of slightly contained chaos, because the nearer the verity creeps toward the face, the more violently Victor Newman fights to keep it buried, and that resistance only accelerates his downfall. Investigators renew old injuries under the guise of procedural industriousness, but everyone knows what they're really looking for, the missing pieces Nick confessed to caching, the fingerprints of Newman power smeared across a case that should have ended veritably else. Victor's attorneys work around the timepiece, issuing denials, hanging counterclaims, trying to drown data in legal noise, yet every tactic feels concave because the verity has formally taken root in the hearts of those who loved Nick. Sharon, torn between grief and purpose, eventually unlocks the communication Nick left before, and what she finds isn't a detailed concession but a roadmap, names, dates, fractions of recollections only Nick could have known, each one a breadcrumb leading straight to the taradiddle that destroyed an innocent life to save Victor's throne. Sharon's hands shake as she realizes Nick didn't want her to expose the verity out of wrathfulness, he wanted her to ensure it couldn't be silenced. Victoria, meanwhile, confronts Victor directly, her voice pulsing with a blend of fury and heartache as she demands to know what Nick failed guarding. Victor denies it at first, reflexively, but his eyes betray him, and that single crack is enough for Victoria to understand that her father's topmost sin wasn't ambition, it was allowing his son to carry the cost alone. Adam watches the family fracture and makes a choice that surprises indeed himself. Rather of exploiting Victor's weakness, he aligns with the verity, still feeding information to the very people Victor formerly controlled, not out of redemption, but out of a bitter sense of justice. The media delirium explodes when a former substantiation way forward, inspired by Nick's death and defended by substantiation that proves they were paid to stay silent, and suddenly the narrative shifts from scuttlebutt to ineluctability. Captions scream about corruption, cover-ups, and the Newman conglomerate's rotten foundation, while Victor's abettors scramble to save themselves, booing information to secure impunity. Each treason feels particular, but Victor knows he earned them all. The worst blow comes when the family of the wronged victim eventually learns the verity, that their loss wasn't an accident, not fate, but a calculated immolation, and their public grief ignites outrage across Genoa City. Victor stands before cameras issuing statements devoid of emotion, but behind unrestricted doors he unravels, visited by Nick's voice reminding him that this was always the price of power. When the substantiation is eventually laid bare, the altered lines, the falsified evidence, the plutocrat trails, there's no room left for denial, and Victor does commodity unbelievable. He stops fighting. Not because he has accepted guilt intimately, but because the fight itself has come pointless without Nick. As Newman Enterprises begins to deteriorate under the weight of suits and examinations, Victor retreats into insulation, girdled by monuments of a heritage now tainted beyond form. In the final reckoning, Victor isn't led down and bind. His discipline is far crueler. He's forced to watch as everything he erected is disassembled piece by piece, knowing that his son's last act wasn't to save him, but to save the verity. Nick's concession echoes through every courtroom, every family battle, every shattered alliance, icing that Victor Newman's name will ever be linked not just to power, but to the cost of abusing it. And as Genoa City moves forward, scarred but awakened, one verity remains inarguable: Nick Newman failed freeing a megacity from a taradiddle, and Victor Newman will live the rest of his life trapped inside the consequences of it, a fallen Goliath brought to his knees not by adversaries, but by the love and immolation of the son he could no way completely cover.